Hello all, can you imagine what it was like for the crew of a submarine in the middle of the ocean when they began to realize that their ship was teeming with secrets and something supernatural? Now I will tell you about it. A British bomber notices signals at sea asking for help from a floating hospital. And this operation is assigned to the submarine Tiger Shark, where we meet Mr. Loomis and Captain Bryce. The next day, they already see the casualties, but the enemy has been spotted 7 miles to starboard. So the captain immediately gives the command to work at full speed and load the casualties, who turn out to be only 3, 2 men and a woman. This news flies like a rocket among the crew, and then we are introduced to Mrs. Clare and Mr. Kingsley. There were about 300 North African patients and 70 crew members on board, so these guys can be considered real lucky. Bryce sends Odell to warn the crew of the possible presence of an enemy vessel nearby and apologizes to the girl that they will have to be roommates for a long time due to their inability to disembark, and also adds to communicate less with the crew because they treat her strangely. Odell is new to the case because this is his first time at sea, but he doesn't understand why the enemy ship only fired 1 missile at the hospital. Loomis asks him if he wants coffee and, after a sign of agreement, orders him to make one. Claire comes to her patient who has been saved and advises him to sleep and talk less, and their dialogue is overheard by Bryce. In addition to the girl on the ship that leads to misfortune, there is a new problem. Right above them sailed an enemy ship that suddenly turned on the sonar, and at that moment everyone held their breath, when suddenly, as if by thunder from a clear sky, the player in one of the cabins started up. In a few moments the barrels flew toward them, so they had to isolate themselves completely and endure the blows. They were also lucky that the last barrel that was rolling right over the ship went overboard. The higher-ups were figuring out if someone could have turned on the turntable or if it was an equipment oversight. But a call goes out and Bryce is reported that the 3rd wounded man's pants are sewn in Berlin. The captain storms into the cabin and takes the girl out. Despite Claire's pleas to comply with the Geneva Convention, Bryce provokes the German to grab his scalpel and then shoot him in self-defense, and the girl should now be confined in a cell for the rest of the voyage. When Bryce returns to his place, the sound of the turntable is heard again, which jams, and then the captain smashes it and leaves, as Claire watches. Odell came to the higher-ups and a dead body was being removed nearby, but he came to find out who might have turned on the turntable, but got no long-awaited answer. And in the middle of the night Claire hears whispers begging her to run away, and under the bed she sees a dead man's feet. But when the whole crew rushes in, the corpse is in its place and Claire accuses the 2 boys of their silly jokes and they are forced to wrap the corpse back up. But in the cabin, the guys are celebrating a good joke, and as Stambu drags the body upstairs he hears whispers asking him to turn around, but when he realizes it's not the crew's jokes he falls down. He tells his colleagues, and of course nobody believes him. The ship is hoisted and the crew all run for air, and Claire leaves the cabin just to rest. But she accidentally spots a book that has fallen out of Bryce's cabin during a healing and goes back in to put it down and curiously takes a look at the ship's log. It turns out that the boat had previously been commanded by Lieutenant Commander Winters, whom Bryce had replaced a few days before. Immediately the ship begins to panic. The sounds of propellers were heard from the left, so the boat made an emergency dive, but they hit the bottom and Bryce broadcast over the loudspeaker that smoking is now strictly forbidden and hydrogen readings have plummeted. The girl didn't understand what was going on and Bryce showed up. He said the noise was the sound of the nets rubbing against the hull and that they had recently destroyed a German ship and Captain Winters wanted to get a couple of accessories for his shelf. The crew talked him out of it, but he got up and still slipped, hit himself and died before they got him out of the water, so he was captain now. As Bryce was leaving, he started seeing things he didn't know. And the hydroacoustic heard on the Karma unknown to him sounds, and immediately the chains crashed into the boat, which crippled the hull of the boat, and the flood began. All the hatches were instantly closed and they tried to fight the water by any means possible, and the attempts were not in vain. The flow of water ended and they managed to give full sail and dodge the critical blows on the propellers. The cause of their discovery was an oil leak after hitting the bottom, so Odell, Stambu, Lieutenant Stephen Kors and radio operator Wally are sent outside to fix the breakdown. But there they are met by huge stingrays, and when the men do get between the hulls and split up, Stambu finds an oil leak, and Odell, working with Kors, decides to call him in for a frank conversation because he wants to clear up the confusion about Winter's death. The fact is that Winters went out on the outside deck that night, accompanied by Kors, Bryce, and Loomis, and it is their word that the boat ran into something and caused Winters to stumble. But Odell remembers perfectly well that the boat did not collide with anything that night. Kors confesses that this is not true and reports the following: there were survivors in the water and Winters ordered them shot, but he, Bryce, and Loomis resisted, and an argument broke out in which Winters slipped, hit his head, and fell into the water, and the trio decided to lie to protect his reputation. Immediately afterwards, Kors sees Winter's ghost and dies in an accident, hitting his head on a beam, and even Odell sees these ghosts. When the crew returns, they say they lost Kos, and while Claire was trying to help, she got hit in the face by Stambu. The rest of the crew listen to the strange knocks and figure out by Morse code what they were told a word back, but Bryce calls the officer's room for 5 minutes. There it turns out they fixed the leak, and Bryce orders them to go to port, but Odell claims it's a 2-day walk to their ports, a pointless death loop. But Claire bursts into their conversation, claiming there is a poltergeist on the ship, but Bryce won't listen to this nonsense and orders no one else to try to turn the crew against him and prepare to surface at 7 p.m. However, even stranger things begin to happen next. The boat suddenly changes course despite all attempts to secure the helm. When it is tracked, it is discovered that the boat is sailing toward the spot where they sunk the German transport. Excitement begins among the crew. Some of the sailors speculate that perhaps it was not they who sank the German ship at the time, but it was them. Trying to get into the helm mechanism, the crew causes a hydrogen leak and an accidental spark burns most of the crew alive. Claire, Kingsley, Odell, Wally, Stumbo, Bryce, and Loomis are the only survivors, but the latter soon sees Winter's ghost in the mirror and panics to get off the boat, but once off it, he is killed by one of the outer pins. Trying to find survivors, Claire finds Seaman Haug, who is still alive, and tries to help him, but the latter, before dying, says that the crew of the Tiger Shark does not deserve help, much less help from her. Then the boat's power goes out and the temperature drops drastically, and Winter's ghost flashes more and more in front of everyone's eyes. Claire asks Bryce to tell the truth about Winter's death because it might help them understand what is happening on the boat. In response, Bryce tells her that she shouldn't pretend like she doesn't understand. A superstitious Wally suggests that Winter's ghost has the following purpose: he, as captain, is bound to die with his ship, which never happened, and thus he craves some kind of satisfaction. While the others are trying to make sense of the boat's mechanism, Claire looks into the ship's log and reads the records from the night the German transport was sunk. From them, she discovers that Bryce identified the ship and that Kors gave the signal to torpedo it.at some point. Claire finds a draft sheet in the log, on which she sees a hand-drawn cross, then notices that the description of the German transport's demise seems familiar to her. She flips through reference books of German ships and Allied troops, finds the relevant sheets, and shows Odell the terrible truth. When Winters, accompanied by Loomis, Kors, and Bryce, goes up on deck that night, they are horrified to discover that the German transport was in fact the Fort James Hospital, in which Claire was sailing. Odell concludes that Winters wanted to save the survivors, but Loomis, Kors, and Bryce were not prepared to be court-martialed, and, in the ensuing altercation, Bryce, taking a cane from the captain, accidentally stunned him, causing Winters to fall overboard. The survivors try to manually activate the ballast relief mechanism so that the boat can surface, but Kingsley is killed, but the boat resurfaces after that. Then the signal of the passing British ship Archimedes appears on the radar and it contacts them, but suddenly Bryce shoots the radio equipment because he can't stand the fact that he has dishonored his uniform. Claire, seizing a moment, sneaks out to the outside deck and tries to use a flashlight to signal the ship. Suddenly Bryce appears behind her and takes her at gunpoint, to which Claire suggests he kill her and the others in order to put an end to it, as he did with Winters. Tired of feeling guilty, Bryce puts a bullet in his temple. The remaining characters evacuate to the Archimedes, where they see the Tiger Shark and her dead crew suddenly go underwater before the first rays of the rising sun. Odell expresses doubt as to whether the boat was at the mercy of the dead winters, but Claire is of the opinion that the boat's course was changed for a reason. In the final shot, the tiger shark goes to the bottom of the ravine, on the edge of which lies the hulk of the Fort James.